Hello, everyone, and welcome to 1929. I'm kidding. I'm not going to do that voice the whole time. Wouldn't that be funny if I did that? If I
Yeah,
put on the
see,
old, 30s radio voice the whole time, kind of like the opening of Up, like that old movie they show. And now, Chad will present the albums of the... No, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, welcome to Picture This. Welcome to our black and whiteified Picture This. I'm wearing a gray shirt. Chad's wearing a black blazer. But it's all black and white to you anyway. So, Chad, how you doing? Welcome to Picture This 1929, our oldest episode yet.
I'm doing great, and yeah, it's very interesting to watch movies this far back. I mean, it's not as old as you can get because obviously you have actual silent films and
Yeah.
that whole era. This was like some of the first of the talkies that we're going to talk about today, and I'm very excited to talk about them. When I went through them, it's just very interesting to go. I'm not going to know anyone in this movie, in any of these movies. Know of them.
Right.
I've never heard of them. Pretty much. I'm not going to maybe relate to a lot of the stuff that they have to say or things that they have going on. But I was actually surprised that some of these are a little bit more progressive than I thought they would be, while others not as much. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely interesting because this is a time in history, and I know you're going to talk about the history itself, but like in film history specifically, where we just got the transition from silent to talkies with the jazz singer a few years back, but like we're kind of in that era still where Hollywood hasn't cracked down on what is or is not allowed. These are technically called pre-code movies, at least as most of these movies that we're talking about are. So that's kind of interesting because it's like almost like it's got more risk and boundary breaking than movies that would come after it. Like I think the slate of 1939 is a safer slate of movies in terms of like audience friendly and audience appropriateness than like these movies. And that this is a decade before, because that's the oldest movie year we've covered up till now is 1939. So even in just 9 years, I would say that year is a little even safer than these in terms of subject matter. Like this movie lineup, like aside from one, which is just kind of just a straightforward biopic, you've got four pretty like heavy topics you're dealing with. You're dealing with war, you're dealing with jail, you're dealing with divorce, and you're dealing with sex. Like four very like polarizing taboo type subject matters, or not taboo necessarily, but like definitely not safe by any way, by any means. So like it's a very interesting slate for that reason, especially given the context. Like you said best, like it almost feels like it should be a little more I don't know, less progressive, or not even progressive, but sometimes provocative. I don't know. It just takes a lot more risk than I expected from the time, which is very interesting because, only one of these films I think nowadays is kind of like still in the constant conversation. Some films themselves are even hard to find in the slate, but like I definitely think each film has something interesting to say about it, even if the movies themselves aren't great, which is going to be really interesting.
But even a couple of them, I'll say, feel so like ahead of their time that it's like we're still talking about the issues that they raised in these movies. So
yeah, and it's like one of those things where I think that's what kind of Hollywood has always been trying to be a filter for, or at least movie making. I shouldn't say Hollywood, because Hollywood is kind of the opposite. Hollywood is kind of restricting those things, but I think movie making in general has been all about trying to like break the boundaries and set a message and tell, kind of get your point across in a way that is, meant to make a statement. And I think in the 30s is when they started to crack down on code and like, this is what you can and can't have in movies. And then we started to see in like the 70s is when they broke back out of that, or 60s, 70s. So this is a really interesting period of time to talk about. And it's very interesting also because we don't really have a lot to talk about in terms of like the Oscar race or anything, because there was no Golden Globes, there was no SAG, like none of those pre-show precursors. This is just kind of like what was nominated at the time was what was nominated. There was no way of really like assessing Oscars back then or anything. So it's very interesting to look at. But Chad, why don't you take us into the history of 29 or 30, whatever you decide to focus on, because there's another year which is 28, 29. So we will talk about 29 again. And now we're kind of in the bridge between 29 and 30, movies from 29 and 30. It's a little complicated, but why don't you take us into the history of 1929 and 30?
Yeah, our first year with the slash. So, but I decided to go on the later end of the slash because we are going to get into 29 in the previous year whenever we get to that year. So yeah, here's 1930s history. or what I found from it. The Indian National Congress declares this date as Independence Day. The first patent for a field effect transistor is granted in the United States. Gandhi informs the British Viceroy of India that civil disobedience will begin the following week. We'll cover Gandhi at one point.
Yeah, the movie Gandhi.
The Motion Picture Production Code, we talked about this, the Hays Code, is instituted in the United States, imposing strict guidelines on the treatment of sex, crime, religion, and violence in films for the next 40 years.
Right.
Neoprene is invented by DuPont. It's like a rubber. The dedication of George Washington's sculpted head is held at Mount Rushmore. Anglican bishops approved the use of birth control in limited circumstances. The first FIFA World Cup starts.
Wow.
The radio drama The Shadow, yes, the superhero, airs for the first time in the United States.
Wow.
Scotch tape is sold for the first time in the United States.
Oh my God.
A pathologist in England achieves the first recorded cure of an eye infection using penicillin. Adult Turkish women are given the right to vote in elections. Were they ahead of us or behind us? I have no idea. In either way, it's still too late.
Yes.
In London, inventor Harry Grindle Matthews demonstrates his device to project pictures on clouds, which reminded me of the movie Asteroid City. Came out this year.
Oh yeah. At first you said Grindle, and I was like, oh, London Professor Grindelwald. No.
A vision for the creation of Pakistan is outlined, so it wasn't yet a thing.
Wow.
Pope Pius XI prohibits Roman Catholics from using artificial birth control and reaffirms prohibition of abortion. And that's another thing that we're still facing today. So there you go. History is doomed to repeat itself, I guess.
That is just wild, though, that like Pakistan's is like not a thing. Like this is so far back in time. Like we are coming up on 100 years of this year. Like it's still hard to fathom watching any movie that's 100 years old. And I think, what are we? I'm trying to do the math. We're 6 years away from the 100. So we'd be 94. This is 94, 95 years ago. Like this is wild to me. Like just that there were movies that existed that, at least for some of them, have held up well in terms of restoration. Some haven't. But like, it's just amazing that we can access this stuff. Like, that's just amazing to me. Like, Scotch tape was invented the same year that we are talking about these movies. Like, that's just so wild. It blows my mind.
At least it was the first time it was used in the United States. I'm not sure if it was the first time it was invented. Gotcha. But yeah, I mean, it's so long ago, so crazy that we are reaching like, a decade. Or a century divorced from these movies. We can still get into some of these themes and still, think about some of these themes as today. But this is like 3 years before I think any of my grandparents were born. So
yeah, this is at least a few years before mine were born. And this is something I know you focus on 1930, but another thing is like the year before the Great Depression ended, which is also interesting because this is for the Great Depression ended in 1929. So like the movie industry also was very interesting at the time because these movies were being made not just to entertain necessarily, but like, because in the 40s, sometimes they were making movies for the sake of like, we're in war. Here's some movies to either educate you about the war or entertain you to keep your mind off the war. But here it was interesting because it was the studios basically being like, we are going to lose our money. So we need to make movies to make money because we're in a Great Depression. So I think that's also an interesting angle to look at some of these from. Like the Love Parade specifically, literally made Paramount Pictures survive. We would not have Paramount Pictures if it weren't for the Love Parade because Paramount Pictures was so defeated by the Depression that the Love Parade made enough money to resurrect it. And now we have Paramount. I have Paramount Plus, like Survivors on Paramount Plus. I love that show. Like it's so wild that like things a century ago are still having effect today. Like we don't get Top Gun Maverick, at least not in the same distribution without the Love Parade. Like it's just such a weird thing.
It's like
it's so weird.
That's actually such a good point that it almost feels like they should always have the Love Parade on Paramount Plus, and they do not.
Yeah, yeah, and that's another thing we'll probably discuss is just how hard it is to find some of these films. It wasn't hard to
Right.
find necessarily, but hard to find like an accessible, like, oh, let me just rent this, or let me go buy this, or let me get to this from the store. One of those movies is very easy to find. The others a little harder, and then some just almost impossible. But we did find
Yeah,
them all, and we did
there was
watch them.
only one that I was actually legit worried about, but
Right.
it was actually
Yeah.
not as bad as I thought it was going to
Yeah,
be.
and Chad did mention someday we will do 1929, but the reason we are holding off is because one of those movies doesn't exist. Like you can't find it anymore, and you can find
Mm,
it like 20 to 30 minutes in a library at the UCLA College in California. So
we'll make the trip.
when we make we will do it. We are going to we have talked about it off air, but when we get to 1929, we have to talk about the Patriot. We will find we'll correlate it to where we will end up being in California the same time we do that episode, so we can like make it all happen at once, or we don't and we just go back to California. Anyway, we will find a time, probably not in the next year or two, but we will eventually someday.
And if we do find the time to go all the way out there, maybe we do a live episode, or we just at
Yeah.
least
Oh yeah.
record in the same room.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And maybe we like do it at like Disneyland and like ride the rides and like,
Oh
yo, the
shit!
Patriot is awesome. Yeah. Just kidding. Anyway, let's get into these movies. But first, Chad, do you have
Yeah,
any albums or births or deaths for 1930, or did you?
I have a few things.
Okay, yeah,
So I
because
have
we always
some.
like to tack them on, but I know it's very old, so
Mm,
maybe there. I mean, hey, there were probably some people born at least in 1930
there's a
or
good
just
amount of births actually, like a few, like a maybe like a top 10 or a top 12 or something here. I
cool.
have Robert Loggia,
Okay,
Roy E. Disney. I think that was Disney's like brother,
brother.
maybe.
Yeah. Hmm.
Tippi Hedren. I think that's the Birds fame.
Hmm.
Gene Hackman, we know him.
Oh wow, still
Steve
alive.
McQueen,
Hmm.
yeah, still alive. Yep, Steve McQueen. Alan Oppenheimer, no relation. Richard Donner, Clint Eastwood, heard
Wow.
of him.
Yeah.
Sir Sean Connery, Richard Harris, the first Dumbledore. Rest in peace, the other
Michael
Dumbledore.
Gambon. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Both
Um,
Dumbledores are looking upon us now. Very sad.
yeah. And Jean-Luc Godard.
Wow. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a good top 10. You know, you got some
Yeah.
heavy hitters in there. I mean, Connery, Godard,
11, actually.
11. There you go.
And then we have deaths. We have the Sherlock Holmes creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I think it is. And we also have, and we'll get a little bit to this later as well, Lon Chaney.
Yeah. Lon Chaney Jr. has been in some of the films that we've covered already, right? Of Mice and Men, I believe his son was in. Yeah. And is he Frankenstein or his son is Frankenstein?
I think he played like the Wolfman or something.
Wolfman. Gotcha.
It was something like that. But he was like really big into the monster movie thing, or at least his son was. I can't remember.
Gotcha.
I need to know this stuff, but I don't.
Okay.
But yeah. And then I don't. I'll get into. So we'll get into the notable films after this. I'll do the. So I couldn't find any albums because I don't know if they were like readily like making albums like that. But there was the top popular recordings of 1930. So these are like songs. So I got the top 10. We have the Stein song "University of Maine" by Rudy Valley and his Connecticut Yankees. We have the Peanut Vendor by Don Asbiatsu and his Havana Casino Orchestra. Hold on. I typed in like parentheses. That's the only way I dance. I don't know what that means.
Was that a Chad comment or was that part of the song?
It was a Chad comment based on the number 3 pick was Dancing with Tears in My Eyes.
That's the only way Chad dances. Gotcha.
Right. By Nat Shilkret and the Victor Orchestra, vocals by Louis James. Number 4 is Body and Soul by Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, vocals by Jack Fulton. Everybody had their own orchestra at this point. Little White Lies by Fred Waring's Pennsylvanians. If I Had a Girl Like You by Rudy Valley and his Connecticut Yankees. You're Driving Me Crazy by Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians. 3 Little Words by Duke Ellington and his orchestra. Vocals by the Rhythm Boys. When It's Springtime in the Rockies by Hilo Hawaiian Orchestra. Vocals by Carson Robeson and Frank Luther. And last but not least, Stardust by Isham Jones Orchestra.
There you go. Yeah, so if you've heard any of those songs, let us know if they're good, because we will listen to them. But yeah, wow, songs that I bet if we've heard a few of them, if we listen to a few of them, we might recognize them. But I don't know. The more popular music would come later. But that is kind of the blanket history of 1980 or 1980, 1930. Sorry, jumping a little too far. But yeah, we do have. I think Chad has a few or one notable film. We always rattle off all the important films of that year, but I think the most important films of that year were kind of nominated. But Chad, do you have any other titles that you want to bring up from 1930 or 1929 that you want to bring up? Sorry.
Yeah, I have one. I have it's an adaptation of Tom Sawyer. It's the
There
only
you go.
thing that really caught my eye.
There you go.
Unfortunately,
yeah,
I need to see more 1930 movies, I guess.
There's not going to be any of our charts that we normally do of like, oh, what won the Golden Globe? What won the SAG? What won that? We're not going to do that because there weren't any to exist. And we're not going to do like, what was number 6? Because like that would be like digging deep into the cavern of like, okay, who won best supporting actress? Or there wasn't even a supporting actress. You can't even gauge it on that. But like there were literally 8 categories at this Oscars. It was best picture, director, actor, actress, writing, sound recording, art direction, and cinematography. That was it. And then, of course, All Quiet on the Western Front wins the Best Picture and Director. This was the first time ever that a film had won Best Picture and Director. Now that's kind of commonplace nowadays. We see it all the time. We saw it last year, the Daniels and Everything Everywhere All at Once. We see it all the time. But this was the first time ever, so it was only the third time. But the first 2 Oscars, there was a split between Director and Picture, and this is the first time that Director and Picture went to the same film. This is also notable because it was the first time ever that a sibling duo had been nominated in different categories. So in Best Sound Recording, Douglas Shearer was nominated for, I believe it was The Big House, the film we'll cover soon. And then his sister, Norma Shearer, won Best Actress for The Divorcee. So we have a brother who was up for Best Sound and a sister who was up for Best Actress. They both won for 2 different films, which was really exciting. And of course, we'd see siblings go on to win later, like the Coen brothers won later and stuff like that. But very interesting that in the 3rd Academy Awards, you had 2 people, totally different categories for 2 totally different movies win. They have the same last name because they're related. So that's pretty cool. Otherwise, there really isn't anything else to say about the awards other than the fact that they were held 7 months after the last one. As we talked about, the second year was 29 and 28. It was just weird the way they scheduled them back then. And then finally in 1931, they started actually like doing it every year instead of kind of backtracking. So we have talked a little bit about like silent films and talking films. And here's a film that is a talking film, but its title implies silence, if you know what I mean. Not silence, but quietness, if you will. So, Chad, take us. Let's start it off with the Best Picture winner, the one I just mentioned, All Quiet on the Western Front. Chad, take it away.
Absolutely. All Quiet on the Western Front, directed by Louis Milestone, written by Maxwell Anderson, George Abbott, Dell Andrews, and C. Gardner Sullivan. Cinematography by Arthur Edison. Music by David Broekman. Starring Lou Arias, Louis Wolfheim, John Ray, Arnold Lucy, Ben Alexander, Scott Kolk, Owen Davis Jr., William Basquell, Russet Gleason, Richard Alexander, and Harold Goodwin. Synopsis: German schoolboys are coerced to join the military during World War I, and they do. This is based on a book, and it is called All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque.
Yep.
Something like that.
Which is also interesting because the book came out a year before, and this is kind of well, I guess if you're looking at it, our episode title, it came out in 29. The movie was in 30. So it's very interesting. It's very timely. It's like what we talked about with, I think, in 1939 with like Of Mice and Men and stuff, where it's like the movie came out like a year after the book or whatever, which we don't see as much of nowadays in modern culture. I mean, we get Dumb Money, which just came out, which is like a year after the GameStop thing, and like The Hunger Games came out, I think, a year or 2 after the book. But like you rarely see that kind of proactivity. But yeah, very timely of the time, of course, but also timely because we just talked about the remake earlier in this year when we talked about 19 or
Hmm.
I'm switching up all my years in my head, 2022 movies, talking about it because it won quite a bit of Oscars. It was technically the runner up because of the amount of Oscars it won. Next to Everything Everywhere All at Once. So Chad, I'm wondering, have you seen this film before? Was this your first time? And we will get into a little bit, but like, how does this compare having seen the remake? And do you like it better or worse? Is it better or worse? I'd love to get your take first.
Yeah, that was obviously something going through my head
Mhm.
when starting this. Was like, well, this is kind of the biggest reason why, other than we want to get into the classics more, is we wanted to kind of like compare it a little bit with the newer one, kind of like that. Sometimes when a movie that is from an older movie, like I'm sure whenever we do A Star Is Born, we'll be like, now we got to go watch the old A Star Is
Right,
Born,
right.
kind of a deal. So yeah, so that was in the forefront of my mind. And I mean, yeah, this all of these were a first time watch for me. I
Same.
am not. I'm probably a little bit less versed in classics than you are, but I'm getting there. I'm slowly watching a lot more, and
Hey, all these were
actually
first
like.
watches for me too, Chad. No, it's okay.
But I'm just saying, like in my classic
Right.
knowledge, I'm getting better than I was, but I'm not as good to where I've seen all the 1930 movies, of course. What are you talking about? But yeah,
Right.
this I like this
Disraeli is my
one.
middle name. Sorry.
I like this one more than the remake. Just a little bit more. I wouldn't say
Hmm.
it's like, oh, it knocks it out of the park, or anything like that, as far as being so far above the other one or anything like that. I think they're both doing the same thing in just different ways, and I feel like that's what's good about the newer one, is because it's like, well, we're going to kind of do some of the similar scenes and stuff like that, but we're going to show it like more visually, because this one is a very like dialogue heavy movies in certain
Mhm.
respects. They actually come out and say what the message of the movie is, and what war is like, and and stuff. And it begins with them being basically told by their teacher how great it is to go and fight for your country, and it's such a noble thing, and stuff like that. And it
Yeah,
feels
almost like
like,
it's fun. Like, oh, you definitely want to do
yeah,
this. Yeah.
and it feels a little bit like another movie we talked about earlier in the year, Born on the 4th of July,
Yeah,
where
very much.
he had such a very pro, like, I'm gonna go fight for my country, die if I need to, kind of a
Yeah,
deal.
because that's
And
kind
then
of real
later
life.
on,
That's what they advertise it to you, even on the commercials and stuff. And for some people, it is that it's the I want to be noble and kind of this pride thing. But for a lot of people, especially for certain wars, this one in particular, and of course Vietnam with Born on the 4th of July, like once you get there, it's like, oh, yep, reality check. This sucks.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's just the reality of most wars. At least, there's a difference between going and training and then being in war. And I think sometimes the training aspect, it's like, no, I'm like a noble person. I'm doing this for my country. But like once you're on the battlefield, in the battlegrounds, like everything changes. It's a whole perspective shift for sure.
yeah, and this is kind of like is this in between World War I and World War II?
Yeah. The
Because
movie
like,
take place, yeah, between the two wars, yeah, but the film is covering World War I.
yeah, so that's what I'm thinking, is because this slate, at least two movies in the slate, like cover a war and are kind of a little bit like anti-war. Where in
Mhm.
another movie we get a line that says, "War's never a solution; it's an aggravation." And then in this, we get like we are saying, the gung ho. I'm going to go join the war and do it for my country. And I feel like that's the often the propaganda that's thrown at people to entice them to want to join and say, this is a noble pursuit. This is something like, what will this country be like if you don't go fight? And in some ways that's true, but then in other ways it's like, and this is like the anti-war, person in me that's just like, yeah, but there's probably other ways you can solve your problems than just going to war.
Right.
So
Yeah.
for me, I found if something has an anti-war message, I feel like I'm gonna dig it. Like, you saw I love the Thin Red Line. We talked about that. I really like the All Quiet remake. But yeah, this one I like a lot of the speeches that they give, particularly when the kid goes back, to talk to his teacher that told him to go in, and he
Hmm.
talks to the class and stuff, and says, like, stuff that they've been through, and it's like people who tell you that it's noble to go, die for your country, even might even be people who've never been and don't even
Hmm.
know what it's like, and they're
Yeah,
just like,
exactly. That
wow, I
teacher is an
know.
example of like someone who has no idea. And back then we didn't have TVs either. Like there was no way of
Yeah,
seeing it. It was all whatever we saw in the movie theaters, and some of that was propaganda, and it was shown to be this valiant thing. And sometimes it was just word of mouth and hearsay. This was one of the first times ever that people had gone to war and actually come back to tell the tale. And we see the scenes when they do return home from war, and that's one element we don't see in All Quiet on the Western Front is the actual return home. And you see the people who are like, "Oh my god, how was it? How
true.
was it?" And he's like, "No, it fucking sucked. Stop. What are you doing? You're corrupting our minds." You get that added perspective.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the best years of our lives. That movie is all about
Hmm.
coming home. It doesn't have any of it in the war, whereas this one is kind of a bit of both. But yeah, it's like that idea too of like they don't have any reference point. Like all their reference is word of mouth. So if all they're hearing is, "Oh, it's great, it's great, it's great," then they assume it's great. It's not until they've seen it with their own eyes, and then they can be the ones to tell others it sucks, and then
Yeah.
later on, like nowadays we see it, we can visualize it, so we
Yeah.
know what to expect. So it's a very interesting putting that time period in perspective in that sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's one of those things to where, like, in the remake, like, I respect how they're, like, trying to do a lot of show don't tell kind of a deal,
Hmm.
because, like, sometimes that's an interesting, exercise. Can you convey the same type of emotion and thought in just, I mean, they talk in the movie, but it's not that abundant. Um and can you portray the same thing in such a physical way? And I know a lot of people are like, this new remake of All Quiet is so harrowing and just like depressing. And it's like, yeah, it is. But what I like about this one is a lot of the conversation, because you get a lot of the action, but they have a lot of conversation, just like soldiers sitting around talking about, like, wait, why are we here again? Like,
Well,
what
yeah,
what is this all about? Like, they don't even know why they're fighting the war. And I
I,
feel like, shouldn't they know that if they're going to be
right.
dying for it?
Right. And I think what this version does so well, because I'm with you, I think this is better. And I'm kind of the opposite of you. I think this is leagues better than the remake, but
Hmm.
I think it's
Okay.
because you get that youthful voice. And in the new one, they're young, but I think only like the first 10 minutes we see that great scene where they're looking at their uniforms and there's like bloodstains on it and they're all like questioning it. But then beyond that, they all almost kind of feel like mini adults. Whereas here, I think they don't lose sight of the fact that these are kind of brainwashed kids. And I think one of the great examples of that, I think the reason for that is because of all the great dialogue. I think because you are able to have these characters speaking more often, you're able to remind yourself more often that these are just young kids at the end of the day. And I think the one scene that for me is the most harrowing is when the one kid is hurt and he has his legs amputated.
Mm,
He doesn't even know,
yeah.
and he's lying in the bed, and his friends kind of come to comfort him. And the one friend looks at the boots and says, "Well, hey, bud, you're not going to need these shoes anymore. Can I have them? I need a new pair of boots." And in that moment, that guy is just innocently asking his friend, like, "Hey, you don't have legs anymore. Can I have these boots?" But the kid who's missing his feet are like, "What the fuck, you asshole? Of course, like,
Yeah.
really, you're gonna do this?" And
Yeah.
his friends are like, "Really? Like, bad timing, bro." Like, but I think that's kind of why this movie's so amazing, is because that is the youthfulness talking. Like that's the inexperience. They're supposed to be kind of mindless kids because they don't know better, because they've kind of been brainwashed. So you're gonna have kids who are just
Mhm.
like, "Oh, bro, you got your legs blown off. Can I have your shoes?" And it seems so fucked up, and that is the case. It is fucked up to ask, but it's because these kids are so young and they're inexperienced and they don't know better, that it almost kind of creates this extra layer of tragedy too. Because you're like, oh, like it made me sad watching that scene, because I'm like, damn, like this. I mean, it's just so unfortunate. This kid literally lost his legs, and now his friend's asking for his boots. And he even takes the boots afterwards. He like when he leaves, he like holds the boots and walks away with them. And you're like, oh my god, because that's the thing. They're not even on the battlefield. They're in a hospital. And I think that's kind of where this movie I think works so well for me, is it doesn't need to be on the battlefield 100% of the time to show the
Yeah.
effects of war. And you get a lot of the effects of war through the conversations. Now, the actual battlefield stuff, you do get a lot of great stuff with that too. Great stuff meaning like effective stuff, not great. It's not great, obviously, but you know what I mean. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
effective in the same way the remake was, and I think the remake did successfully show how bad the conditions of war were. But I think there's also something to be said about, let's not show 100% of the battles. Let's show the conversations in between where the characters
Hmm.
are literally thinking out loud. And I think that's where this film has so much more perspective that I'm able to tap
Yeah.
into more. And I also think, I mean, I know people are hit or miss with that score in the remake, but I think the remake almost, because it's so new and polished and the visual effects are good and the makeup's good and the score is it kind of has this, I don't want to say coolness, but it kind of makes it more glamorized than it should. Whereas here, it's very bare bones, stripped down. There's impressive
Yeah.
design, but like, I think it doesn't let the design get in the way to where in 1930 they were probably like, wow, that design is incredible, because at the time that is incredible design. What they're able to pull
Hmm.
off is absolutely incredible, including the
Yeah.
camera work too. But I think nowadays watching it, because it is just kind of, I don't want to say stationary, but it is the way it is. I think we're able to focus more on the actual messaging and story, whereas the new film, I think, has a little bit more to distract from that. I really like this one. I think it's really powerful, and it made me sad, which I think is the goal. And we kind of talked earlier, like
Hmm.
these films kind of pushing the boundaries, like having movies that kind of brought up these conversations back then when war was still a noble thing that people went and they fought and they, hurrah, hurrah. I think this is a bold film at the time, especially. And even now, looking back 100 years later, like, it's bold that they made a movie like this with as much of a statement as this and were able to get so much success because of it. Like, I think that's really admirable.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly like more impressive the more and more you think about it, because you're like,
Mhm.
it's so easy to watch a movie like this and just go like, oh yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I've seen better. It's like, yeah, but you've seen better with like 100 years worth of like know-how and figuring stuff out and innovation and all this stuff, like where people will go back and watch something like Halloween 1978 and they'll go like, it's not even scary, and then you go like, do you know what you just watched? Are you
Right.
serious? Like, do you know like how impressive that is, to have been made the way it was and kind of deal? And I think even like for people like you and me, sometimes we have to take a step back and go, this is more impressive than sometimes I think it is. Like, I can be very um dismissive of things sometimes, and then I'll go, you know what, this was one of the first things to do
Right.
probably the stuff that it's doing right now,
Mhm.
and that's amazing.
Yeah, that's how I feel about like a lot of the old horror, not even Halloween, but like the Nosferatu, Vampire,
Yeah, of course.
Dr.
Yeah.
Caligari. When I watched those, it was like, okay, but then I'm like, wait, like this is revolutionary, and I think this is kind of a
Yeah, I got
similar deal, you know?
Carnival of Souls back
Right,
here, if I
right,
can
right.
learn to point the right way. There we go. Thank you.
Nice, nice. Yeah, but like all these older films reminding us like why we have films now to begin with, and why people have wanted to kind of keep one upping the craft. But I think it does hold up. Like, I don't think I ever watched this and went, oh, that's a little dated. Like, it really doesn't feel that dated. It feels timeless because obviously it's set at a very specific point in history, so it's got a date on it. But like, it's still an easy watch. Like, I'm never watching it. It's never an eyesore, in
Hmm.
a way that I would say some of these other films may end up being at times. I think this really does feel like a movie you could watch now and in 100 years from now. And I think you would still get something out of it, if not more.
As long
So,
as it's
yeah,
preserved and all that stuff, which
right.
hopefully like Criterion can get our back and start putting some of these on Criterion,
Yeah.
and there you go, it's preserved. But
Mhm.
just a couple of things before we
Yeah.
wrap it up. You mentioned the boots, and that just reminded me of, because it kind of like looked like they were maybe going to be like an important piece of the story, because they do like show it transferring from like soldier to soldier. And then I kind of took that to mean something like, to the war effort and to the government, the soldier is not a an important person. The soldier is just a thing that goes into these boots, and the boots just keep passing on as the soldiers get
Yeah.
used and done. And they'll send like a flag to the family. I'm laughing because of sarcasm, not because I think it's funny.
No, no, exactly.
Um,
No, it's it's
they'll
it's
send,
almost wild. You have to laugh. It's almost laughable because
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
what? Like, yeah.
And then the other thing too is, almost like horror, like turned into a horror movie where I'm just like the guy lying in the bed in the hospital, and then they're sitting there talking about like once they wheel you to that room, you're never seen again. And I'm like, oh
Right.
my god,
Mm-hmm.
what? And they're like, they'll tell you it's for like you're gonna go get bandaged up and you'll never come back. And I'm just like,
Yeah, like
Jesus,
dress.
this is
It's
like
the dressing room or something like that, where you like change your dressings, and it's not. It's like, oh, we're just gonna leave you here to rot, basically. And that's another thing too, is like they're not getting like, it's not like you're getting escorted into the other room and it's like, all right, boom, you're dead. It's all right, now you're gonna lay in this room until you die a slow,
yeah.
painful death, which is I think even worse because it's like implying that like you're just getting moved to another room to literally just waste away, which is just awful, you know.
And that's why when people go, there's only like 3 genres in all of film. And I go like, yeah, a war film is a horror film. Like most war films are just horror films.
Yeah, it is, and this is a horror film. I was scared. I was sad. Yeah, I think it's one of the most effective horror films of the 30s for sure. I wouldn't say otherwise. Yeah, right. Added to the 31 Days of Halloween. You know, not that type of horror. It's not like a let's get spooky
No,
tonight
yeah.
thing, but yeah. But All Quiet on the Western Front. I mean, back then they weren't nominated for a lot of Oscars, but it was nominated for 4, but it won 2 big ones: Outstanding Production, which at that time was the name for Best Picture, Outstanding Production, and then Directing, not Best Director, Directing. It's very interesting how these categories have changed their names. Lewis Milestone, and then it was nominated for Best Writing and Cinematography. So it took 2 big awards in the big, what was it, a ballroom? Was it a theater the Oscars were held in? Let's find out. It was the Ambassador Hotel. It was the big room at the Ambassador Hotel. Let's talk about the actual big room being jail, being prison. Chad, tell us about the big house.
Yep, The Big House, directed by George Hill, written by Francis Marion, Joe Farnham, and Martin Flavin. Cinematography by Harold Winstrom, starring Chester Morris, Wallace Beery, Louis Stone, Robert Montgomery, Layla Himes, George F. Marion, J.C. Nugent, Carl Dane, DeWitt Jennings, and Matthew Betts. Synopsis: a man is convicted of manslaughter and goes to a prison with deplorable conditions and inhumane policies.
There you go. Remember Chester Morris and Robert Montgomery's names because they will appear later. But
Yeah.
yeah, the Big House, otherwise known as Jail. I didn't know what this movie was going in. I mean, we haven't seen any of these movies, but like not knowing what it was going in, I was like, Big House. Is this going to be like a comedy about like all these people living together, like a Full House? I really didn't know what it was. Is it going to be like
An
Bear and the
Animal
Big Blue
House.
House? I don't. Yeah, like Animal House. I don't know. Yeah, it's like about a fraternity. No, it's jail. Big House is jail, and that's kind of the movie. It is jail. It's just kind of like I almost call it like the 1930s Orange is the New Black for men without the nudity and lesbians. It's very much the idea of like new person in the jail is like a little more reserved. They're put in a cell with the tough people. There's someone who's trying to get out, and then the new person ends up getting a hard edge and kind of sabotaging it and becoming the tough person. Like it's very much your prison film that you see, or like Orange is the New Black. It's the same thing. But you know, I liked it. I think it's got a cool little like it's just a cool little film of the time. Like I don't think it's necessarily trying to say much. Like I think this is the one of the few films that has probably the least amount of like message. Really, it's not trying to say one thing or another about like being a criminal necessarily. It's not like Shawshank where a guy's trying to like clear his name necessarily. There's a guy who's like about to get his parole or whatever, and it's not. Look at that. Was that coincidental or purposeful? It was purposeful.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, it's like one of those things where I don't think it's necessarily trying to say like a message necessarily, as much as just telling like a really interesting story about dynamics of different characters within this prison. But Chad, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of The Big House?
Yeah, actually, like I didn't read like a lot, but I read like just like a little snippet of the movie just to figure out what it was
Mm,
before I watched it, and I saw that it said something about how it was very important to just like prison movies. It was like
yeah.
one of the first ones, super influential. And so I'm like, damn, okay, reputation right there. And then I was like, I'm definitely wearing my Shawshank shirt. I wore that in our very first episode of Picture
There
This.
you go. And we'll be talking
When
about a
we
prison movie next month from the same director. Won't tell you what yet. We'll keep you guessing.
Nice. Yeah, when we awarded Shawshank the award, will we do the same for The Big House? We don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I really like this one. Just basically for is just a very solid movie.
Mhm.
I think if it has a message, the message is just about how prisons are terrible, and
Yeah.
how kind of like it starts the conversation about like the whole you know prisons not being places for rehabilitation, but being prison like places for punishment,
Mhm.
places to send our unwanted or our people we've given up on. And then I don't know if this is probably hasn't been started with the whole, prisons for profit
Mm.
thing that we've gotten to these days. I'm sure that wasn't happening back then, but this started the conversation so we could get to stuff like that down the road. And this is the other one. This it was All Quiet was talking about
War.
how shitty war is, and we still have wars and they're still shitty. And then this is the same thing. We still have prisons that could be a lot better. Not saying that prisons are like war is never really necessary. I want to say it's never like a good thing. It happens because people can't figure their shit out. Prisons you kind of need, but you can have them be different. You can have them be something to um like I said, rehabilitate people and
Mhm.
make them productive members of society again. Give them a little bit of a timeout they need,
Right.
and stuff like that. But this, it didn't just focus on that. It wasn't just look at these prisons. They did actually had
Yeah.
like a story,
Mhm.
and I feel like that kind of plays into the whole idea of the prison being terrible, is the people are kind of pitted against each other sometimes. They're trying to figure out how to
Right.
escape, and just hardened. And you have to be that way. You have to be like this one guy who has to hear about his mother dying while in prison. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I didn't even get to see her or hear from her,
Yeah.
kind of a
And I
deal. That
believe
my
his
mom's
buddy
dead.
does his buddy tell him, right? He's just like, "Oh yeah, your mom died, bud."
It's
Right?
one of
Like, isn't
those
it very
things.
casual?
Yeah, it's one of those things to where he's got to pretend to be tough, right? So he's like he's pretending. I think it's like he's pretending it's a letter from like his
Mm.
girlfriend or something outside or whatever, because he actually can't read, but he
Mhm.
doesn't want to show that. So he has his friend read to him, and his friend's the one like reading the letter, like, "Sorry, your mom died, man."
Right.
And
It's
then he's like,
very yeah. Yeah,
"She
they're both trying
died,
to like
huh?"
conceal it.
And I'm
Yeah.
just like, Jesus Christ. Like, he's kind of just like accepted that things like that are going to happen without him now, because he's in there and his life is in there and it's no longer out there.
Yeah.
And
And then you get a very interesting storyline with Anne, Kent's sister, because Kent's the one who like we are kind of following for the most of the first act, because it's like
yeah,
he's the one getting to the prison, and it kind of emphasizes that
the
idea of
Andy
what you were talking.
Dufresne. Yeah.
Yeah, it's what you were talking about like the idea of prisons not being rehabilitation, but kind of just like a place to have these people, and
Punitive.
yeah, and it's the idea of him getting to the cell where it's like these two guys, it's so tiny he can barely breathe, let alone have any space, which even in the Shawshank the cells are bigger than that. But we're following his character for most of it, but then it kind of becomes more about you need to pull up the names here. Morgan, who is like kind of the
Mhm.
trickster. He's the one who steals the cigarettes at the first meet cute, and then like he's very trickstery, but he's the one who's about
Meet
to get his
cute.
parole. But like yeah, that's the only word. The first meeting, I should say. It was cute though. There was some good chemistry between the three. But like the idea, Morgan, then like about his parole and how he's trying to like break out of prison, and because he's framed then for well, first he wants his parole, then he's framed for the knife, and then he's sent into this like solitary confinement, and then he decides he wants to escape because he won't get his parole and stuff like that. So we're following him more, and we see that he kind of starts a relationship with Kent's sister. Kent's sister, who we met for the first time, being like kind of the person to come visit the hospital for Kent, or the prison for Kent, then ends up being like this love interest for Morgan when Morgan kind of exits. And there's a great harrowing scene where Morgan visits her like bookshop or whatever, and it's the two of them, and like he's on, he's basically on the run, he's hunted, he's wanted, and he's like talking to her in the bookstore, and it's like you don't know what's gonna happen because she knows who he is because she's been to the prison to visit Kent. And I find it interesting what I was trying to say earlier. I find it interesting that she's a character perspective because at the end, it's all about how they get together. He leaves prison and then he can finally be with his inmate friend's sister. And I just thought it was interesting how it's like you would almost forget that she was his sister by the end because it's more about the romance, and that just goes to show that
Mm-hmm.
she has kind of accepted that, oh, Kent's in there, he's done, he's in there for life, he's
Mm.
never going to get out of here. This guy's out of here, like it's like this relationship means more because he's just kind of wasting away. There is no rehabilitation, like you said, like I'm not going to get my brother
Yeah.
back, so like he's kind of dead essentially. Like this is essentially me sending him away forever. And I just thought that was an interesting perspective too, to see for that character being so much about her brother in the beginning to at the end not giving two shits about her brother and being more invested in this guy who is getting out. Like I just thought that was an interesting added element to show that like prison, once you're in there at this point, that was it, kind of. Like very few people got
Yeah.
parole, got out, especially
It's a good point.
Kent. Seeing his descent, and it's not a crazy descent, like he doesn't go too mad, but he takes the knife and then frames Morgan for it, and it's a very shifty thing he does to show that he's got this edge. And then you got Butch, who's kind of what you said earlier, like the kind of trying to conceal his masculinity, toxic masculinity thing. It's just a very interesting trio
Mm-hmm.
of characters. I honestly kind of wish we kind of consistently stayed with Kent toward the end because I feel like his story kind of peters out a little bit.
Yeah.
And then Morgan's picks up. It was almost like who am I supposed to be invested in? But I like how it's kind of an ensemble effort. It's not like there's one story going on. There's three different journeys and they kind of all kind of converge at one point, but you can kind of see three different perspectives on the whole thing. I thought it was very interesting. And I think it's well shot too. It's one of those films that also still I think holds up pretty well.
Yeah, it's interesting to see like some of these that look so choppy and some of them that looked you're like, "Oh, this one's actually well put together." Like, I mean, sometimes that's just what they had to work with, but
Mm.
or like maybe it wasn't as well preserved or something like that. But yeah, that's actually kind of a good point because this is like a not a very normal structure that you would
No.
normally see in a movie where the character that you start with isn't the main character. It's almost like Scream in that way, right?
Yeah.
Where you start with someone else and then you're like, well, maybe this guy is actually the main character. He's the one that has the arc. He, gets out, spoiler alert, and I guess you already said that.
No.
He gets
Yeah,
out and he has the romance and all that. So which I think is actually really cool
yeah,
that
it's like a
doesn't
TV
start out
show.
with our
It's like
main
a TV
character.
show where like the pilot kind of presents a few main characters, but then as the seasons go on, they find out who like the audience is most invested in. So they kind of like shift it to where like maybe this season, this character's story is like the main character. I almost said Better Call Saul, but it's not the same thing. That's a spin-off show entirely, but it's
No,
like
this
that.
would
Like
be Oz.
right, yeah. So yeah, exactly. But yeah, I just found that very, very interesting. Yeah, the different perspectives. But anything else with the Big House? I mean, we both very much like it. It seems.
I mean, I just like prison movies in general.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say this is one of my favorites to throw on or anything
Hmm.
like that. It's not Shawshank or, a lot of other things, but sometimes, I just look at the ones that inspire the things I love and I go, wow, this is like really cool.
Hmm.
Um, and well made and just, something that I would recommend if somebody was looking at the history of film. And it's like
Yeah.
interesting to like go and trace from this movie to the movie that I put on like a pedestal, like how did it go from there? It'd be interesting to trace prison movies throughout the decades. So
Right.
and this is kind of where it all started. So
I
mad
agree.
respect for the Big House.
Hell yeah. The Big House nominated for 4 as well, and also wins 2. It actually wins the award for best writing, so that's the equivalent of screenplay in the day. Also wins for sound recording, as we said, it held up. And then it's nominated for best picture. outstanding production. It's also nominated Butch, the actor played Butch. Wallace Beery is nominated for Best Actor. Back then they didn't have supporting, so yes, he is a supporting character, but he was nominated for Best Actor. Yeah, you know what's worse than rotting away in prison, Chad?
Nothing.
I mean, yeah, but if you had to pick something, watching Disraeli.
Wow. Okay.
I'm kidding. I'm semi kidding. There's a little truth in the joke, but I had to come up with a segue, and I was like, you know what? I was trying to think of how I can segue Big House, which is very entertaining, to something very boring, and I was like, you know what's worse than, I don't know. I should say, you know what's more boring than sitting around in a prison? I should have said that, because nothing's worse than prison. But like, what's more boring than just sitting around? Anyway, Chad, tell us about Disraeli.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're not getting into my thoughts just yet. Let me actually.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell us who made it and all that, but
That's right. Yeah. Disraeli, directed by Alfred E. Green, written by Julian Josephson, cinematography by Lee Garms, starring George Arliss, Doris Lloyd, David Torrance, Joan Bennett, Florence Arliss, Anthony Bushell, and Michael Visakoff St. Synopsis. British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli attempts to buy the Suez Canal in order to complete the British Indian Empire, based on Disraeli by Lewis N. Parker, and I would rather watch this than die in prison.
yeah, okay. Yeah, no, then die in prison. Yeah. I'd rather watch this than die in prison, but like, what's more boring than just sitting around in prison? Like, assuming you're going to get out of prison eventually, and like, you're not going to get like hurt or shanked or anything else in the shower, and you're not going to like eat terrible food. Like, you're going to at least get bread. Like, what's the next worst thing? Maybe there are like 10 or 12 or 20 worse things, but like more boring things, let's say. I think I showed my hand. Chad, what are your thoughts on Disraeli?
I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't
Okay.
think it was like that boring. Like it honestly just felt like a stage play. Where it's just like this one guy, the British Prime Minister, he wants a specific thing, and he's just having lots of conversations that actually has spies in it, who are trying to stop him. Apparently, there's a bunch of liberals in the movie that are trying to stop him, or like that Disraeli doesn't know what he's talking about. And so you're following this, like, I guess, like crazy conservative guy who wants to keep buying, like, property from India, so that they can just take it over, and this was like right when I think that was happening or something.
Yeah, probably.
But this is also where we get that quote that I said earlier: war is never a solution, it's an aggravation. So like in some ways, like I liked things that Disraeli said, even though I was like, I don't think I like this guy's politics.
Right.
It also was like a bit like of a love story, to where like this one couple was getting together, and then like the one guy was like, real full of himself, and then the lady turned him down, and I was like, well, I guess good for you. I don't know if her motives for saying no were like that noble, though. But then you have Disraeli trying to get them together and trying to inspire this one guy to be, stop being that, like, uppity, guy or whatever, and actually just like go and get things done, and stop having this like blind, respect for things, and to actually see things how they are, and things. So I think this movie was like a little more interesting than maybe you
Yeah.
thought it was.
Maybe. You
And
also got, I feel like just you in general are a little bit more invested in like history than I am, I guess should say, because I think you were a little more into Lincoln than I was too. Just some movies
yeah,
like
maybe a
this,
little
I
bit.
think you're more invested in like talking about like the different policies and the different histories about it, and like actually like becoming a little bit more invested in the conversations, which is a compliment, because I wish I could be that way, and
Yeah,
invest
yeah.
myself that way. So yeah, that makes sense. But
I think the other thing that like didn't make me, because I know that you were saying that there was one that was incredibly boring in the slate. I thought it was a different one. I
oh,
didn't think it was Disraeli. So yeah, watching this, and the reason being is because it's pretty short. It's like 70 minutes. So I guess that's even saying something. Like even a movie that's that short, can still be like incredibly boring for you.
I might have
Did we
watched a
watch
different version.
versions?
Maybe mine was 90 minutes, so maybe not as bad. But
maybe it was like about 90 minutes, but I thought
I
it was
don't know.
like
It
a
just
little bit
felt so.
shorter. But
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
But different people watch different films different ways. But like, I think the main thing for me is that like I think the trend we hate to throw around, or that we love to hate throwing around, or I don't know, hate to love throwing around, whatever, is Oscar bait. You know, like what is Oscar bait? And a lot of the times people point at like these long biopics, they're just about a person doing a thing, and it's just like there's no kind of artistic like imagination brought to the table. And I'm not saying that's this film necessarily, but I think this film kind of the way Big House set up like a trajectory for prison films and All Quiet for war films, and you know the way we've seen kind of certain trends come from these films. I think in a way Disraeli is almost responsible for like the standard historical biopic about a person where an actor is in a lot of makeup and a lot of fake hair and playing a role that is very similar to history, a reincarnation. It's your, you know, your darkest hours of the world, which I think that's a much better film than this. But like, I just think this is kind of the first ever kind of standard biopic about a person like that is told like this, that I feel like there's almost like this extra animosity I have toward it because of that, because I feel like it set kind of the wrong kind of trend of how movies should be when you're making a movie about a historical figure, to where like, you know, we're fans of a lot of other cool biopics. I mean, Spencer was an awesome biopic we both love. Love and Mercy, you know, these biopics that are about people that are real life, but like take such interesting approaches in telling the filmmaking. You know, we're not the biggest fans of the movies where it's just like, this is a person, this was their life. And I think that's kind of what this is. And I think that's why I'm extra like bitter toward it. Cause I'm like, man, this is just like a boring biopic about a dude who's like, I guess at the time, maybe the story is more investing for some people. And like, obviously you were more invested in the story and what was going on, the policies than I was, and the love story, I guess. But like, for me, it was just like, I could open a textbook, and it's kind of that idea of like I could open a textbook and probably get this. I could read the play and probably get this. And I think even sitting in a room and seeing the play performed, where I can like see the actors in front of me doing it for some reason, like could be more investing than this. I just didn't find myself invested in it. And some films work for different people different ways, but I think this is just kind of set a bad trend for like the kind of just regular old biopic about a person's life and history. And I just think watching for an hour and a half this guy just trying to purchase the Suez Canal or whatever just wasn't as interesting for me. I don't know. And I hate to be that, you know, negative toward it, but it's just like, man, I mean, I give it credit. It was an old film. So like, you know, I love the idea that like it exists because it's like this part of history, but it's like, I don't know. It just wasn't my thing.
Yeah, I mean that's totally fair. It's one of those things to where, like, this does kind of feel like it might have been just a vehicle for Arliss, I think his name was, to
Yeah.
beat this guy Disraeli.
Mhm.
And it feels like the kind of same thing. It was a very apt comparison you made to Darkest Hour, which is interesting because like Disraeli is like, I feel like if it was a little bit longer, it would have overstayed its welcome. So I think it was like, if it's gonna be that like boring, that it's the perfect
Yeah.
length for that.
Right. At least it's not too
Whereas
long. Yeah.
whereas with Darkest Hour, which is the big what's his name?
Winston Churchill.
Yes,
Gary
but
Oldman.
Gary Oldman.
Yes.
But the big Gary Oldman Oscar vehicle, that I think might have overstayed its welcome because it was 2 hours of boring, just like this was 90 minutes of boring. So
Yeah, and we will talk
I
about
mean,
that film someday.
yeah, we will. I definitely don't disagree with you. I don't think this was one of the most exciting movies in the world. But you know, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It's kind of like middling, I guess.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is, I think this struck you in the way that I had to look it up. We watched this. Henry V was for me, where I
Oh,
was like,
okay.
that movie was terrible.
Oh,
So
wow, okay, yeah,
yeah,
and I
it's
love
like
that.
kind of the
So,
same
yeah, yeah,
way.
yeah, 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 there you go.
Yeah. So
Yeah, like, different films work for different people, especially at this era. Like, it's harder. I think the difference with me with this and Darkest Hour is, like, Darkest Hour at least has, like, such modern visuals in terms of like, the technology made and the score. Like there's still other things that can keep me engaged. Whereas here it's like I didn't have the luxury of being like, oh, I can focus at least on the filmmaking. Because like for me, the filmmaking, like this is one of the films that like it's not as well kept preservation wise. Like I don't think it necessarily looks as good as it probably did back then. None of the films do, but that's also kind of why it didn't necessarily help. But yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
No,
All right.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I thought you had one other thing to say, but yeah, I will say George Arliss did a good job, and that's why it does win one of 3 Oscars. It's nominated for production, it's nominated for writing, but it does win Best Actor for George Arliss, who like Chad said, it's like a vehicle for him. And if it is a vehicle for him, I thought he did a good job. I'll give him that. Speaking of who won Best Actress that night, it's a woman I brought up earlier because her brother won Best Sound Design for Big House. It's One Big Circle, but Norma Shearer won Best Actress for The Divorcee. So let's talk, Chad, about The Divorcee.
Absolutely. The Divorcee, directed by Robert Z. Leonard, written by Nick Grind, Zelda Sears, and John Meehan. Cinematography by Norbert Brodeen. Music by Jack Yellen and Milton Ager. Starring, a marriage is destroyed after an affair. Synopsis. Wait, no, that was a synopsis. Starring. I'm sorry.
As soon as you did it, I was like, "Oh, where's he going with this?"
I mixed this up. That was a synopsis. This is starring Norma Shearer, Chester Morris, Conrad Nagel, Robert Montgomery, Judith Wood, Helen Millard, Florence Elridge, Mary Doran, Robert Elliott, and Tyler Brooke.
There you go. Chester Morris and Robert Montgomery. They're back in 2 very different roles, too. It's very funny seeing, like, the guy who played Kent, the, like, reserved guy going into the prison in the Big House, was, like, this guy that, like, kind of a little bit more smooth talking, kind of more manly machismo. And then Chester Morris, who was, the kind of love interest of the Big House, kind of the more endearing hero at the end, ends up being kind of the annoying husband in this one. I just thought that was a fun little counterpart because I did watch them very close to one another, so I was like, this is the same people. And I looked, I was like, they are the same people. It goes to show that acting wasn't the profession it was today, where like you had so many options. It was like, this is a hot start, let's get him for everything type thing. But yeah, what did you think of this film, The Divorcee? There's a sigh.
This movie was very frustrating. It was like watching kind of Gaslight all over again.
Yeah.
Although I don't think is good.
Yeah. It's funny because it's like, yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. And I think if you tack off the last 15 minutes of this movie, I think it is that. It's like, oh, here's a really important message about double standards when it comes to, men and women and husbands and wives. And then that last, I don't want to jump so far to the end, but like, the last 10, maybe even 5, 4, 3 minutes where she's like, but I love him. I'm going to go back to him. I'm like, argh! I literally got so angry because like up until then, and we talked about code, the idea of like, you could have like divorce once code comes into play, divorce itself is not a thing. Like we wouldn't get divorced until like later on with like Kramer versus Kramer. Like that's why Kramer versus Kramer was such a big deal at the time, because like divorce itself was not talked about in movies because this is pre-code. Like the fact that they're taking the time to like show a story about a woman who is cheated on and says, you know what, fuck you, I'm gonna cheat on you, and he says, well, fuck you, I'm gonna divorce you, and you're like, okay, fine.
That's the exact dialogue.
Double standard. I'm not allowed. You're allowed to sleep with women, but now I'm the villain because I did it after you. Fine, yeah, we are divorced. I'm gonna go now fall in love with this guy, and then all to just cycle back at the end and say, I want my OG. I'm like, come on, really? Like, it's so I get what you're saying because I think it's so ahead of its time until it's not, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, I had just like you had a very visceral reaction. I had like a no kind of a deal at the very end. Like, why?
Stop,
lady, come on. You were out. Dude, like, this guy is problematic from the beginning. Like, even before she knows that he cheats, he said a line that said, I don't know if this was commonplace back then, but he said, I'd love to make love to you until you scream for help. And then she's like, I can't scream or something like she like plays into that foreplay. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Come on, that's
Yeah.
weird.
Which again, pre-code, like in 2 more years, even 1 more year, you don't get even that conversation in film, which I
Yeah.
think is kind of the reason why I'm kinda like, "Oh, this is interesting," because 'cause I'm like, "This is like
Mhm.
before they had like strict guidelines." I like that, but then it's like they try to make it safe at the end. I'm almost wondering if like code was like talked about at post production. They're like, oh, maybe we should tack on this ending just in case this like policy comes into play, where we have to kind of like, I don't know, sugarcoat things. I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, like you had like two good options for an ending here where it's like she ends up happy with the guy that she ends up with.
mm,
You know, you don't even have maybe that woman come in and, you know, she's like, I was divorced too, kind of a deal.
mm.
Or you just have that happen or something, and then she goes, you know what? I'm fine just being on my own, just
Oh
finding
my
out
god,
who I am.
if that had happened, I would have been like, this would have been
Great
contender for
movie.
number one. Yeah, like that's the thing.
Yeah,
It's like up until then it
yeah,
is because I think it's a very interesting. Obviously, cheating is not good in any facet, and I'm not saying she was right for cheating on him, but like when he
right.
cheats on her and then she makes the decision to, she says balance the accounts, which I thought was a funny little phrase, but like that's when it's like okay, and then when he berates her for it, it's like like so this is what the movie's trying to say is that he can get away with it, she can't, or at least that's how
Yeah.
he sees it, and like that's not good, and like that's where I was totally on board with it. I was like waiting for like that kick-ass ending. I was waiting for her to find him at that New Year's party and just like chew him out, but nope, that
Yeah.
didn't happen. Yeah, it's a shame.
Dude, yeah, and which is why because like you're watching this whole movie where he's just like this little kid, like the whole movie, like like you know, kind of a deal. Like
Yeah,
you can't do that to me, and it's like he lies to her, does cheats on her, lies to her, and then she finds out, and then he's like, it's not a big deal, no, it doesn't mean a thing, kind of a deal, and then like he goes away, and I'm like you're gonna go away after that, like something's gonna happen, like kind of a deal. But then yeah, like they even have that conversation, so it's like nuanced enough to have that whole thing where she comes back at him and she's like, oh, so what happened to it not being a big deal and it not even meaning anything?
mhm.
Why isn't that the same for me? I'm like, this is progressive as hell. I like this. This is really cool. As this goes along with All Quiet in the Big House, which I thought were both progressive. Disraeli maybe a little bit less,
Mm.
and then especially because Disraeli had a pretty problematic line. Now that I think of it, about like white country or something like that, and I was like, oh shit. Yeah,
I probably
but
fell
then
asleep by then.
you were asleep.
No, listen, I never fall. If I fall asleep, I always make sure to like. If I wake up, I'll be like, "What's the last thing I remember?" And I go back because
Yeah,
I
same.
don't ever want to like miss anything because there's a chance one scene alone can save a movie. It's happened.
Or
Um,
ruin it like this one.
right, right. Oh, imagine if I fell asleep. I fell asleep before the last 10 minutes. It's okay. Let's talk about it. I'll picture this, and maybe Chad will tell me what
I
happened.
love this movie. It's great.
So
You
progressive.
love
Go
that
women.
movie?
Go women. Women rock. She was right in all her decisions.
Slay.
Which is true. Women rock. Women are awesome. But it's like this
True.
is she's setting such a good example. And I've seen a lot of reviews saying like this is good at showing like a woman's authority in a relationship. And yes, she makes the choice to go back to him because it's like her choice. But it's also like she makes a choice to go back to him. It's a bad
Yeah.
choice. It's the abuser, kind of like letting the abusee. This should be called the abusee, not the divorcee, or the
Yeah.
abusee.
Yeah.
Like because she comes back to him eventually. Like he wins in the end, and he's the one who gets the control of. Well, am I gonna let you
Yeah.
back or not? See, like it's just so annoying.
Yes. And that seems a common theme with a couple of these, where it like ends up being like the man gets the say and whines until he gets the say. And
Hmm.
it's like, why is that like a trope in movies back
Right,
then? Like the man
right,
whines
yeah.
until he gets his way.
And I think, well, obviously, we have one more film to talk about after this, and there's a similar parallel. But I think
Yeah.
there's also, when you're making a movie, if you're gonna make a movie that has like kind of ridiculousness like that, then like make it ridiculous, make it a farce, make it a comedy. This one's played as a drama too.
Satire.
I mean,
Yeah.
this movie opens with a guy literally like deforming his wife's face by drunk driving off a bridge because he's distraught. Because like the one guy's upset that she's getting married, so he like gets drunk and drives and like drives off that bridge or whatever, and then she ends up with like a facial deformity, and it's like, yeah, it's like a lot to start off a movie. It's like played for like real drama, and I think that's the one thing about this movie too. It's very tonally inconsistent. Like it starts and there's this guy playing his little ukulele and everyone's fun, everyone's having a good time,
Yeah.
and then it's like boom, car accident. It's like whoa, like what? And it's supposed to set up the fact that he always loved her and that his love for her made him go so crazy that he like drove himself to drinking and driving. And then at the end, he's like, I always loved you, and that's when they get together. But then 10 minutes later, she goes back to the other guy. And it's just, yeah, it's
Gotcha.
like, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, because I never really I forgot like kind of where that whole storyline came
Right.
into the thing.
Because,
I remember there was like
yes.
one line where he called the guy murderer or something,
Yeah. Because,
and
like,
then I was like,
I
I
don't
don't
think
think
he
this needs
murders
to be here,
anyone. Yeah.
but
She survives. Because it's like,
or he
there's the,
calls him like I don't know, he called him like some sort of name like
Mhm.
reckless driver or
Yeah,
something
because
like
there's the
that.
two couples, and like the one is the the divorced and the divorcee or whatever. But like it's like this guy really loves this girl, but then she's engaged to him, so he drives off the cliff, so he feels bad, so he marries that girl. But then when she gets divorced, he decides to go with her, but then he goes back to his girl, so she decides to go back to his guy. It's very soap opera. But yeah,
Yeah.
that divorcee, very very unfortunate ending, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in it. I liked like her, the actress.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
I liked a lot of the stuff, in the beginning, in the middle, all that stuff. I like some of the dialogue. Like I wrote down one of the lines. I said, "There's plenty of places to go and lots of things to do. We can go all the places, do all the things."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah,
I'd
like
like to talk like that.
yeah, it's not bad. Like the dialogue is not bad. It's not a bad screenplay in that way. It's just not a good like story. The writing
Yeah,
is good, just not the story.
because they make it like a whole point. At one point, I didn't know like what the imagery was, and I thought she was joining like a convent or something.
Mm,
And I was like, no, don't do that. Like, don't just like be like, I can never love anyone else or whatever. No, no,
mhm.
it was just their formal way of divorce, where it's like you go and you have to like wear something, I guess, and then just be like, you're now free like as you were before or something like that, and
Yeah,
it's
man,
like a
that's
whole
weird.
thing. And then like they don't like do anything. Like because I read the synopsis before this just to kind of get an idea what it was, so I could watch it real quick, and then I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of a cool movie of redemption where after she gets cheated on, she goes and she like gains a new life, and that's
Mm,
kind of the story. And it's like we only get to that her gaining a new life in the last like 20 minutes of the movie, which is a short movie, but 20 minutes of the movie, and then the last like 3 to 5 minutes are the part that's like, oh no, what?
right. Yeah, screw it. Yeah. It's just so all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah.
Anyways,
Anyways, the divorcee does win an Oscar, and it's the one that it deserves, which is Best Actress for Norma Shearer.
yeah.
She won alongside her brother for sound recording. It was nominated for three others: Outstanding Production, aka Best Picture, also directing for Robert Leonard, and Best Writing. So it gets actor or it gets actress, nominated picture, directing, writing. Another film that deals kind of similarly about a little man child not getting his way, and then the woman delivering, but in a different way. We'll talk about it. The Love Parade. Let's keep this parade on going.
Well,
Chad,
that
tell us about the Love Parade.
why the hell did you take my synopsis, Bill?
Sorry, is that what your
It's
synopsis
like
was?
no,
The
it's like
same
no.
thing. No.
Well, maybe a little bit. The Love Parade, directed by Ernst Lubitsch, written by Guy Bolton, cinematography by Victor Milner, music by W. Frank Harling et al. There was a lot of musicians, I guess, because it was a big musical, whatever. Starring Maurice Chevalier, Jeanette MacDonald, Lupino Lane, Lillian Roth, Eugene Pallette, E. H. Calvert, Edgar Norton, and Lionel Belmore. Not Barrymore, Belmore.
Mm,
Synopsis: Queen Louise of Sylvania has marital problems with her newlywed husband, Count Alfred Renard.
yeah. There you go. Yeah, the thing we were alluding to earlier is like there's a little bit of setup in the romance and how they get together, but for a majority of it, it's the guy is kind of intimidated by how cool and awesome the girl is, and he kind of gets a little pissy. His manhood is kind of challenged to where he becomes a little bit of a man child, a man baby, but not in the endearing way that Will Ferrell is in Elf. Like he's just like a a little bitch. But like the thing is, what's interesting is at the end, then instead of, oh, I'm gonna like go back to my abusive, toxic husband, it's like, I guess I'll fuck the man child. Like, I guess I'll have sex with him. Which, like, I'll be honest, it's not the best messaging to be like, oh, well, if I put out for him, he'll shut up. But I think it's a little bit better only because it's like she is making the decision herself to do that, and she could easily, because she's the queen, just like send him away anyway. Like, she doesn't need him, and I think they make it a good point to show that. And also, it's delivered, like I said, in a funny way. It's not like a dramatic thing like the Divorcee, where everything is so dramatized. Oh, I'm tripping over my words. So dramatized to where the messaging itself just becomes icky. In this one, yes, he's a little bit of a whiny man baby, but he's still a silly, funny personality to where like there's a little bit more of an empathetic take on that character, to where he's not an abuser by any means. He's just like a little bitchy. And then she, is presented as a strong woman, and she ultimately makes a call, and it's presented in a funny way. There's like that whole thing where she comes into his room at the end, and she's like, "Come on," and he's like, "Mm-mm," and then he walks out of the room, and you're like, "Oh, he's going to her room just to grab his pajamas," and then he walks on back, and she follows him back. Like that kind of visual thing, that was very funny. And then you've also got the two friends kind of sitting outside commentating on what's going on in the relationship. So I think it's all about not just the substance, but the presentation. I think in the Divorcee, it's the substance is presented in a way that's supposed to be taken seriously and dramatically. Whereas here it's presented, this is a musical, this is a comedy, it's got these other elements that kind of make it feel more, I don't want to say appropriate, but fitting for the context of what this film is than the Divorcee does in that respect. There's still a lot of other things going on in this movie that aren't related to like the ending, but since we were on the topic of the ending being similar, that's my take at least on it. At least it's presented in a way that's farcical like the rest of the film, to where it's a little bit more of like okay, ha ha ha, not like ooh, you're going back to your abusive husband. Ew. It's not as icky, I don't think. But I'd love to hear your take, Chad, on the love parade. Were you feeling the love?
In some ways, but then also in other ways, I think it was kind of as icky. Even though I do agree it was presented in a different way. It's more of a comedy, which is fine, but and maybe a little bit more interesting and exciting during some of the parts. But when I got to the end, I wrote like a little, okay, so this is what the moral of the story is.
Okay.
And I said the moral of the story is, and I used a similar word that you used. The moral of the story is the husband of a matriarch bitches so much that the matriarch decides to be submissive to him and make him the patriarch so that all is right. I was like, that's essentially the story. Did I get that wrong?
I mean, no, I mean, yeah, patriarch, I think the thing is, it's not as
it becomes
much
the king.
Right. Well, I think by marriage, but I don't think she's necessarily like saying like you're gonna rule, you're gonna be like you're gonna take charge. I think it's more of a like I'll appease you type deal. But really, she still wears the pants type thing. But maybe I took a different take. I'm not sure,
because it feels like he does this whole like kind of a thing. I'm gonna be this way. And then she starts to like kind of like cry and go like, okay, I'm gonna do everything you want, kind of a deal. And I'm like, oh no, that's like she's like such a strong leader, and then now she's becoming this. I need to, like you said, like appease this man, and it just feels so the wrong message. Where it starts out with the strong woman, she's like you said, amazing. She's doing all the stuff. Singing, going out,
singer,
leading the band,
beautiful woman. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
she's a cool
definitely.
princess. I mean, it's cool to see a badass princess. We all saw Super Mario. Badass princesses take the cake.
True. So for the messaging, I think we're mostly on the same page with it. But I do agree. I think that in some ways this movie is exciting and fun because it's a musical, so there's a lot of fun like numbers and stuff. There's some kooky characters and things like that. I think the problem though is that like this is the one that I thought that you thought was extremely boring.
Oh, okay.
Because I was like, this is a 2-hour movie, almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
And there's very little plot in this. I was like, nothing is happening in this movie. I'm like, the plot is so simple that we pretty much just told you what it was a dude getting married to a woman. I think it was like his punishment too, was to get
Well,
married to this
he's
woman.
yeah, he's like sent away from Paris, I think. Or no, he's sent to Paris um to report to the queen after I'm reading it here for reprimand following a
Uh,
string of scandals, including an affair with the ambassador's wife. So yeah, he's a player, he's a cheat, he's and that's kind of what I like about this too, is he's like it's almost the Flynn Rider and Tangled thing where he's like a bad boy and then he meets this girl and she kind of like makes him more human. She's like, listen, you suck. Let me show you how to actually be a loving partner. And I think that's the reason why at the end it's a little more earned than in the
mm,
Divorcee, where it's like because in the Divorcee he is abusive toward her, verbally and emotionally and
oh yeah.
manipulatively, not as physically, but still. In this one though, he I think just very immature and she kind of gets the best out of him, and I think their blossoming romance is really nice. It's sweet to see them fall in love, which I think is important. We see the love. The Divorcee, we never see the love, whereas here we actually see the love, to then when at the end when he's starting to kind of like get intimidated by how much more power she has than him. I think at the end, it's almost like not necessarily that she's handing it over to him and handing over the power, but more so, I think she herself misses the love they once had. And she literally just wants to rekindle it. I think she's not going back to an abuser. She's going back trying to rehabilitate what was gone from the love they shared before. It's a parade, a love parade. It keeps circling around the block. It's the idea of love coming and going and ebbing and flowing, and that idea of you once had this great love, and now at the end she's trying to find that
Mhm.
any way she can. And you know what? If you're gonna be pissy, you little horny little bitch, you know what? Fine. I'll sleep with you and then we'll talk. And then if you're not giving me what I want, fine. You'll be back out on the street because you have nowhere else to go, kind of thing. That's how I kind of took it. And it's
Hmm.
there's a little humor to it. The fact that it's really just his angst and jealousy and bitterness just stems from the fact that he's this horny guy who's intimidated by his girlfriend's job. Essentially, the bare bones of it, to put it in like modern
Yeah.
text, he's horny and his girl is outdoing him. And I think that's kind of funny, especially pre-code. It's like, you're able to make a story that kind of revolves around just like the character being an asshole because he's horny. I mean, it happens with people get hungry too. It's like, oh, I haven't eaten. I'm gonna be a bitch. I'm gonna be a grump. I haven't gotten enough sleep last night. I'm gonna be a bitch. I'm gonna be a grump. It's kind of the similar thing. It's just instead of sleep, it's sexual stuff, which I guess is a little icky in some ways, but it is still human. I mean, some people get that way, especially if they feel like they are better than they are at certain things, and I thought it was a funny ending. But I do see the idea of like she is kind of giving him a little too much power at the end, and she's kind of submissive at the end, which I don't necessarily love. But I still think the whole movie, we saw them at their best, in their most love. So like I think at least then we are still able to root for them at the end, because we do want them to ultimately get back together. Like I don't think she shouldn't be with them. I just think he needs to get his act together and loosen up a bit and stop being such a tight ass. But it's just very interesting to see the evolution of that couple, because we do see the good stuff, whereas just the Divorcee, we see the bad stuff. But I will agree in that respect, like the submission part is like, I don't know. And these are movies from the 20s and 30s, so it's like very clearly dated in that respect. And I think if they were to remake it or something, it would be a little different. But I think for the time, and considering it is more of a comedy than a drama, I think it works a lot better. But no, that definitely makes sense. But I definitely wasn't bored, because I definitely think the music alone kind of made it move a little bit better for me. Like, because they were fun songs. I thought they were very nice songs. I think the performers did well with them too. It's not like, oh, we're gonna sing a little ditty because everyone knows this little ditty. It's like, no, these are actual, like, she's a real good soprano. She's beautiful, got a beautiful voice, and she's
Mhm.
really good. So I think that's another element of it too that made it a little more enjoyable, personally speaking. And again, it's the Disraeli thing of some people watch things and are a little bit more responsive to it than others and enjoy in enjoyment. But it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah, and I will say, like, if you haven't seen this and you're planning on watching it, the Love Parade is at its best during the musical parts.
Yeah.
Those are the parts that I found the best. I did actually fall asleep a couple times during this, but it was because I was
Wow.
watching it
Weird.
at night,
Oh, okay.
and but yeah, I will say, like, the pacing of it is just not there for me. I just like this is one of the ones that could have been 90 minutes, and I think it would have been
Mm,
a lot better at
yeah.
that. So for me, it's almost like, you know, I'd rather take a little bit of a, oh, that was a disappointing kind of story a little bit, but it was a lot tighter kind of a deal rather than this one doesn't know what it wants to do.
Yeah,
And it's just so long for what it is.
that's
But,
fair.
you know, it is what it is when you're like thinking of
Yeah,
ranking the movies. And we'll
and
see where we will rank
and
these
this is
soon.
another one that I think the restoration isn't as good, so it's a little harder to fully embrace the musical numbers because they're a little like the sound itself, the sound mostly, not the visuals, but the sound is a little
Hmm.
less improved than some of the others, where it does kind of have that tingy ringy, like it kind of has that like buzzy fuzzy. I don't know the word for it, but like kind of that 30s sound, that
Yeah, yeah,
kind
yeah.
of can lull you to sleep in a way. But yeah, um,
Yeah, that is a kind of a classic vibe I've seen with like classics like that, where it's just like, oh, it's old,
yeah,
so
the
I can like, you know, it's
yeah,
a
like
little
very
oddly comforting in a way, but
yeah.
it
Oh,
is what it is.
there's something about like a classic movie, and this is kind of a broader than just the Love Parade, but like that idea of like
Yeah,
just having the lights out and an old black and white movie playing. You can't really make out all the
yeah.
dialogue, but you can hear the sounds. It's obviously recorded on the old sound systems. There's something about that that kind of gives a very good comforting vibe. Like those are the types of movies I like to fall asleep to. That or Sweet Life
Mm.
is That Good on Disney Channel. Either or.
Nice.
Because that's just I've got all those episodes committed to memory, so where I don't need to really focus on them. I just kind of am with them. The Love Parade, 0 for 6. It's the only one that doesn't win any Oscars, but it's nominated for the
Mm.
most. So it's got an interesting fact there. So it's nominated for Best Picture, Best Director for Ernst Lubitsch, who also directed Ninochka, which was one of our favorites of 1939. And I think you get a little bit of that playfulness there too.
Yeah,
Best
Noshka
Actor
was
for
good.
Maurice Chevalier for Best Actor, Best Sound Recording, Best Art Direction, and Best Cinematography. So, Chad, it's time to
Ooh.
rank these things. This is one of our shorter episodes, but it's because we have less to say about some of these classics. They're also shorter
Mhm.
movies. So, Chad, take it away. What is going to be your number 5 film today?
My number 5 is The Love Parade.
Love Parade. All right. My number 5, shouldn't be a surprise for me, is Disraeli. Chad, what's your number
Like,
4? The
like
shock.
my number 4, The Divorcee.
All right. My number 4 is also The Divorcee. What is your number 3?
Disraeli.
My number 3 is The Love Parade. So what is your number 2?
Same
Same
top
top 2.
2. We'll see. We'll see if it's the same exact top 1 and 2. My number 2, The Big House.
My number 2 is also The Big House, which means
Okay.
this is kind of easy one, but our number 1
Yeah.
is Chad Say It.
All Quiet on the Western Front.
There you are. It's the one that's
Soldier.
endured the legacy. I mean, it makes sense to be our number 1, and I genuinely think it's the best movie of the 5, as does Chad.
Yeah.
So, yeah, not much shifting around. Just our 3s and 5s were switched. That's it. But we have the same 1, 2, 4. All right, Chad. So you are first, I believe, for Best Actress. So I'll start it with Best Actor.
Sure.
This was a little tough. I think there's some actually really solid performances all around. But ultimately, I'm going to go with the acting ensemble I liked best, which was The Big House. And out of those 3 actors, those 3 guys, I think the best one, the story I was most engaged with was Morgan's. So Chester Morris is going to be my pick
Nice.
for Best Actor. He's also in The Divorcee. He's the awful husband, but I liked him better in this one. I think
Mm.
he has so much range. Like in the beginning of the film, I thought it was going to be mostly about Kent. And I thought Butch was going to be kind of like the big standout because he's the one who got nominated for the movie in terms of character. And I thought Morgan was just going to be like the third guy. But I think as the movie goes, he has his own arc, and I think it's a really great arc. I think he's fun in the comedy bits, but also like that scene where he's in the bookstore, he's almost got a little menace to him because he's on the run from the cops or whatever. And then he also has some heart, and he's pretty endearing. And that's a character thing, but it's also a performance thing. I think Chester Morris does a good job. So I don't know if he's related to
So
Stacey Morris. I got to ask her. Our trivia
maybe,
champ. I don't
maybe.
know.
But just think about that, though. You said he'd played those 2 different characters. Like a lot of people have in their minds the thought of like prisoners like that are pieces of shit because they're like, if you're in prison, you did something terrible. But you said he's the more likable guy than the guy that's not a prisoner. So who was a
True.
piece of shit?
Or what if his character from The Divorcee is really Morgan? Maybe he doesn't end up with Kent's sister, and maybe he gets married to this girl, and maybe that's why he cheats on her, is because he's a player, he's a prisoner, he's an ex-con. I think I just
That's
cracked the
it.
code.
That's
Never
it.
mind. Those movies are tied for number one. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Chad, who's your best actor of the slate?
My best actor is Lou Ayres, who plays Paul in All Quiet on the Western
All
Front.
right, good choice. Good choice. Tell me about Lou Ayres.
Yeah, I believe he's like the main, pretty much the main character of All
Yeah.
Quiet. It's kind of like an ensemble kind of a deal, but he is the one that returns, like he's in like the hospital and stuff like that, but
Mm-hmm.
he's the one that returns to the classroom, which if you have to pick a scene, I think that is like the scene with him
Mm-hmm.
in it, where it's like him returning. I alluded to this earlier, to the professor or teacher that basically, because not all teachers are great. We like to prep up teachers in this show, but not all teachers are great. Like some will just tell you what they've heard, even though they've never experienced it. And he goes back there and he's like, you haven't been there. I've been there. Because as soon as he starts to tell all of the students who aren't really very receptive to what he has to say, and neither is the teacher, not all of them are like, what are you talking about? Like, this is like, I don't know, what do you call it? Like blasphemy almost, even though it's not, I guess, like war to some people is a religion, because he goes back and he's like preaching this whole, it's kind of like a Born on the 4th of July thing, preaching this whole like anti-war type of message that you don't know what it is. It's crazy. This isn't like even worth anything. There's no reason we're doing this. And this is just terrible. And I just love his performance in that. I think he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard because that film is full of standouts. It was hard to pick one. Same as
Yeah.
The Big House. I mean, that was definitely one of my runners up, if I needed it. All right. So, who is
Yeah.
going to be your best actress, Chad?
So I thought about picking one that you might pick. I'm not sure, but I went with kind of a wild card, and it was
Ooh.
the actress in the entire five that I just like every time she was on screen, she just like lit up, and just like my eyes just went like, wow, like,
Mm-hmm.
is she in anything else? Like
Yeah.
she's magical, this
Okay.
person. And she's not even a main character, but
Hmm.
it's Lillian Roth, who's Lulu in The Love Parade. So
Okay.
she's
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
the one actress who's like sitting on the bench with the shorter guy that comes to
Yeah.
sit
With
down, and they're
with
just
Josh.
talking
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
joking the whole time. And there's like a whole thing too, like something about, I forget, this whole thing blew over my head, but the whole stuff with the crossed eyes, and people with crossed eyes are weird or something like that.
I don't
And at
know.
one time she like looks at the guy and her eyes are all like crossed like that, like, and then I'm just like, she's
Yeah.
hilarious.
No, the
Like,
two of
she's
them are so
hilarious.
funny. Yeah, he was my backup if I
She's
needed one for actor. Yeah, the two of them are such comedic gold. I think that's what makes the Love Parade to me so entertaining. The two of them, they're commentating on the whole thing. They're like what are the two Muppets who talk about everyone else?
Waldorf and
Statler or something.
Statler. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
no,
it.
they're them.
Exactly. She's just like a breath of fresh air. Like in a movie that I didn't love, the Love Parade. I really loved her performance. Beautiful, just like photogenic as hell, and just like she could sing, she could dance, she could do everything. And not that the star of that movie wasn't great, but I'm almost like, I just want to see a movie with her in it, just
Mhm.
like her. And I don't know, thought she was great, like her
Yeah.
eyes.
Oh
I
yeah,
think I
so
fell in
expressive.
love.
She
So
Yeah, the two of them could have their own spin-off, and he gives me
yeah.
very Pee Wee Herman like vibes. Rest in peace, Paul Rubens. But yeah, like
Yeah, he did.
yeah, they're so fun. I would love to see a spin-off. But you just
Yeah,
mentioned
rest in
her, so
peace,
I'll
Paul
I'll
Rubens.
talk about her. She's my best actress, Jeanette McDonald for The Love Parade. I did
Okay.
think the lead actress is great, and yeah, they're all great in this movie. I think the acting, but I
No,
mean
she
her
was. Yes.
yeah, her voice, her voice is just so excellent. Her singing is amazing, but like she's really got such a great quality to where like she is it shows how strong she is as a queen, but how tender and compassionate she is as a lover as well. Like, you kind of get both sides of her, the kind of the strong-willed and the more like, compassionate, softer side. I really like seeing all those sides, and I think she does a great job. I think she's much more likable than her counterpart, even though the counterpart is probably doing a little bit more in terms of like singing range, and not singing range, but like the types of songs he's singing are a little bit more expressive. Hers are more kind of lyrical ballads. His are more like da 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 da, you know, like a little bit more athletic singing, I guess you could say. Hers are more lyrical and ballad and balladic, but I really love her songs, and I think she's really great. So our best actors and actresses: my best actor, Chester Morris for The Big House; Chad's Lou Ayer for All Quiet on the Western Front; my best actress, Jeanette MacDonald for The Love Parade; Chad's Lillian Roth from The Love Parade; and our best picture for 1929/30, we'll call it 30 because it came out in 30, is All Quiet on the Western Front. So there you go. Anyone who's mad it didn't win the Oscar this year, it won our picture that year. Two different films though. It was funny because that was ranked. I don't know if you remember. That was both of our number 9 or number 10 for 2022. So
Wow,
it tied for our number
that
10.
low.
It was number 10 for both of us, and then the original was number 1 for both of us. So there you go. Give it time, or give it negative 90 years, and it gets better. You know what I mean? So that's that. That's 1929/30. It's October. It's coming. It's not October now, but it is. It will be October, and you know what that means, Chad, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Pumpkin spice, spice, dude.
Pumpkin spice, but also
That's
horror, baby.
Oh yeah,
It's October.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's sometimes easy to forget because we're so blinded by the lattes and the pumpkin spice and the cinnamon and the pumpkin pie and the apple spice. Sorry. So we're talking about horror. Only a few movies have been nominated that have been like strict horror. Some have been like horror adjacent. I mean, All Quiet on the Western Front, an example. And even the film we are going to be like kind of dedicating the next month to in terms of why we chose it for October is more on a different side of horror than most. I mean, it is a horror film, but it's a different type of horror. But it's a great horror film by many standards. And we're going to talk about it next month for 1999 because we're talking about The Sixth Sense, baby. And that is in a slate with 4 other films, which we will talk about. Also in that slate, American Beauty, The Cider House Rules, The Green Mile, the prison film I was alluding to earlier, The Insider, or The Insider. I don't know. Do you emphasize the in or the side?
The Insider.
The Insider, and then The Sixth Sense. Those are the 5. Let me recap them fast again so we can take it with no breaks. American Beauty, The Cider House Rules, The Green Mile, The Insider, The Sixth Sense. Those are the 5. But we can't do it alone, Chad. We can't do next month alone. It's October. I need a guest. You need a guest. Who's our guest?
Of course. It's my wife, Carrie Webb.
My wife. She's here. Carrie will be here to talk about the films. Well, she will be. Yes, she will be here to talk about the 5 films from 1999, and we're very excited to have her on. Yes. We've done a lot of 90s and 80s and stuff, or not 80s, but like 70s, 80s, 90s. But it felt appropriate because of the Halloween season. It's not, there's no killer in a mask, but it is a horror film nonetheless from one of the great horror directors, M. Night Shyamalan, and American Beauty starring one of the great horrors of our century, Kevin Spacey. So we'll be talking about that film and so many more. And Green Mile is written by Stephen King. So like you got kind of like a whole horror extravaganza. And then you've also got Cider House Rules and The Insider. So where can they find you, Chad, as we head into a more modern colored era and leave this black and white scape?
Definitely. Well, I just want to first say I'm very excited for next month. I've been excited ever since we said we're going to do The Sixth Sense. Excited when we were like, let's have Carrie on. This will be really fun. And I'm excited to watch some of the movies I haven't seen and excited to rewatch a lot of the ones I have because that's going to be a very interesting ranking knowing my love for Shyamalan, King.
Mm-hmm. What's the one you haven't seen or ones you haven't seen?
I haven't seen The Cider House Rules and I don't know if I've seen The Insider.
Got you. I have not seen those 2. I don't know. I haven't seen those 2 and I also haven't seen The Green Mile. This will be a first watch of The Green Mile.
I have seen The Green Mile. Gotcha. I used to have that on a, we'll talk about it. I used to have that on the double VHS.
Because it's so long you need to switch it?
Yeah, so long it's like Titanic in that way. So long you have to switch it. And I used to have to, at one point, leave to go up to my room while my parents are watching it because some of the actual like execution scenes were so
Yeah.
rough
I've
for
seen
a
I
little
mean, I've
kid
seen
to
those
watch.
scenes just because 'cause they're in every Watch Mojo video that the ones of, like, top 10 things that make you cry.
Yeah,
I've seen them all. But, I also wanna say, The Insider is Al Pacino. It's a Michael Mann film.
haven't
So
seen it. No.
what's interesting is I've also never seen a Michael Mann film. He's a director. I've just always been wanting to see
Oh,
films of his. I've never seen that. Never seen Heat. Never seen Miami Vice. All those films. And at the point when we record The Insider, I will have also seen his new film Ferrari at the New York Film Festival. So it's going to be fun, kind of like talking about Michael Mann and like looking at his work too, because I believe this is one of the only, if not the only, films that got nominated for Best Picture for him. Manhunter may have been. I'm not sure. I don't
highly
think he.
recommend Manhunter and Collateral.
Cool.
He
Um,
does great as well,
yeah,
but
and
yeah,
hopefully Ferrari. We'll see.
hopefully, yeah. But yeah, you asked me where you people could find me.
Yeah.
Of course, here, of course, other areas of the Dill Pickle Movie Network. You know, I did a draft day recently.
And
Um,
spooky season, so Chad's going to compete in some trivia because his bracket is the horror Doctor Strange bracket in our MCU tournament. So you'll also see him there next month competing on that.
Absolutely. Yep. Also, check out my channel, Chadwick Webb, where we rank things. But recently, we've also been trying to get into other areas. I have plans to start reacting to more Good Burger stuff with my buddy Jake Tato Reese. Because we did a Good Burger reaction trailer for Good Burger 2, and we have plans of watching the original Good Burger and Good Burger 2 when it comes out and reacting to that and doing a lot of fun stuff with that. Carrie and I have also been doing our 61 days of Halloween, and we've decided to go through and actually review all the movies that we watch for that in videos. So you can enjoy them with us and hear what we thought of them.
Hell yeah.
Trying to do other reviews and stuff like that as well. Trying to pop up my channel a lot more. So yeah, check all that stuff out. There will be more and more content as I continue to stop being lazy. Check out the Nerd Entertainment Network, where we have a show called Welcome to Primetime. Speaking of Carrie being on this show next month, she's on that show all the time along with my buddy Hunter. We talk about horror stuff all the time. And we also rank episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is my favorite show of all time. Carrie's as well. And we also have been doing a lot of brackets because we've been going through the decades of horror movies in bracket form, saying what's the best film of each decade. And then we're going to end up trying to figure out what's the best horror film of all time. Really just based on like our like 3 to 6 panelists' opinions, but they're pretty informed opinions, I'd say. So those are fun brackets. Check that out. Check out that channel. Also on that channel, Hunter's doing a lot of really fun stuff. Dylan actually appeared with him in a nerd news segment
Yeah, that was fun.
that Hunter's bringing back,
Yeah, to
which is
cover
just
the
them
writer's strike.
talking about the writer's strike and other nerd news and stuff. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about that, Dylan.
Yeah, I mean, on this channel, I've obviously been putting in the disclaimers about the writer's strike and SAG strike. The writer's strike is officially over, yay! But the SAG strike's still going on. So if you want to find out any more information, there's information in the description below. And as always, this is not promotion for films, but it is film discussion. If you want to go out and see it afterwards, that's fine. But we are not paid to tell you to do so. So this is a strictly criticism and discussion-based channel, not a promotional channel. So no scabs here. But yeah, you can check me out on Hunter's channel discussing the writer's strike because it was a very fun day before we got the contract, but after they got the agreement. So it was like kind of that interesting gray area there, which was fun. But you can also check me out here on the Dill Pickle Movie Network, where we're doing a lot of things. As I said, a Marvel trivia tournament is happening, not on my own will. Apparently. And then we got an episode of Framewreck that just dropped the same day as this. I'm dropping this and Framewreck on the same day. It's an extravaganza of things that I needed to get before October starts. That's the real reason, is because I push things. But now that we're back in the swing of things, the summer's over. I'll be back delivering on timely manner, hopefully. And yeah, next month I'm doing my own 31 days of Halloween coming up. I will be revealing my 31 films on Marvelous Movie Mondays on Monday. So check that out. Kelsey and I are both revealing our 31 films that we'll be watching, not together. She has her list, I have mine. And then we'll do our special at the end of the month that we do on the channel.
Exciting.
You can find daily. This is an announcement that y'all haven't heard yet, but I was going to also announce it on the Marvelous Movie Mondays. Daily TikToks breaking down each one of my 31 films. I'll be doing a TikTok for each one, like literally a minute, just sharing my brief thoughts, because I can't do full reviews on each, but I want to at least talk about each one. And maybe a podcast every week, just kind of summing them up, exclusive podcasts. I'm trying to get craftier with different outlets, not just the YouTube, but it's been fun journey so far, and we will see you all in 1999. We're going to jump 60 more years into the future. This time machine's worn out, but we're still going to keep it going. Eventually we'll bring it to the UCLA library when we do 1929 again. So we'll see you all next time, and we'll see you all with Carrie next time for our Halloween special. See you next time.